Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today for the dramatic conclusion of the unit on sectionalism. So we're going to start the Civil War today. We've been talking about this unit, how the tensions have been rising and rising. The issue is slavery. Like, the fact that hopefully by this point you can understand why when people try to claim that slavery wasn't the cause of the Civil War, because there are still people out there that claim that. That is just a bold-faced lie. The Civil War 100% was over slavery. Because without slavery, the Civil War doesn't happen. Now, we're going to get into the fine details today of what causes the first shots to be fired in the Civil War and what causes America to go to war with itself. The Civil War is absolutely brutal. All right, more people died in the Civil War than every other war America's ever fought combined. All right, and we'll talk about that in great detail next unit, which is all on the Civil War. All right, but today let's talk about how tensions just boil over the top and the Civil War begins. All right, let me make myself smaller here. Put myself here in the corner. Whoop. There we go. Oh, we'll get this thing here out of the way. And let me make myself more normal sized. All right. So this is the presidential election of 1860. Here's what happens. All right. There's these four dudes. Let me go ahead and tell you this story. So in 1860, after the Dred Scott decision, all right, which basically said that you can't spread, or that there's no way of stopping the spread of slavery because you can just purchase a slave in the South and take him wherever you want. So there is massive outrage against that. There's massive outrage against the Fugitive Slave Act. There's massive outrage over slavery in general in the North. The South is getting increasingly concerned that the federal government is going to pass a law that forbids the expansion of slavery into the new territories. And the South is like, nah, we can't do that, because the South realizes if slavery is forced to, if slavery can't expand, eventually the South is going to be vastly outnumbered by free states in the distant future. And at that point, those states could start messing with slavery in the South. Again, that is like crazy talk. There is no logical thought process by anybody at the time that you would actually be able to go into the South and take their slaves from them, because it's an inherent part of the culture and society in the South and has been for hundreds of years at this point. So the idea that anybody could go in and just be like, no more slaves, would be an impossibility. Spoiler alert, we're 5 years at this point from that happening. We're in 1860. In 1865, slavery is outlawed in the United States altogether. So how does such a drastic change take place? Well, 600,000 Americans are getting ready to get slaughtered. All right. Over 500,000 Americans are murdered. An entire generation of young men are getting ready to be wiped out over the issue of slavery. That's what it takes to have such a fundamental change in American society. So tensions are really, really high, and neither side is willing to give in here. So in the presidential election of 1860, the Republicans are going to run a guy for president. It's a really long and intricate story, so I'm not going to me it's cool, but it's hard to teach it without it being boring, on how Abraham Lincoln becomes the Republican nominee for president in 1860. This is a man who's never won anything before, and he becomes the Republican nominee. There's all these other better qualified Republicans, but different unique situations. He ends up being the candidate for the Republicans. So most of the North is going to support Abraham Lincoln because he is against the expansion of slavery. He's even on record of saying he doesn't like slavery at all. Doesn't even think it should exist in the South. Now, he had said that in 1858, 2 years before, when he lost his campaign in the Senate. But those words are out there and people have heard that. All right. So Abraham Lincoln is not a big supporter of slavery at all. Does not like slavery. However, he's not like, I'm going to come in and get rid of slavery. He's just going to try to come in and be a president and try to figure out the most logistical way of dealing with the expansion of slavery. The South ain't having it. The South is like, oh, absolutely not. We refuse to allow Abraham Lincoln to be the president. Like, that's not a thing that can happen because that guy's like an extremist and whatever. So the South is so focused on keeping Abraham Lincoln from being president that they actually nominate 3 different Democrats to run for president. So John Breckinridge is a Democrat. Now he supports a federal slave code and territories, supports popular sovereignty. So here's this is very interesting. All right. So with Stephen Douglas yesterday, we talked about his Freeport doctrine, where he basically said he thinks that if the states don't want the ability to have slaves, they should be able to say themselves that slavery is illegal. The South is actually asking the federal government to make a law saying you absolutely can have slaves in the new territories in these new states. Which is interesting because it ends up being the South's main rallying cry here is there's too much federal overreach. The federal government can't tell a state what to do, yet at the same time they're asking the federal government to tell new states they have to have slavery, a federal slave code. All right. So John Breckinridge is a Democrat, supports the slave code. All right. Stephen Douglas, also a Democrat. All right. So this is the guy that beat Abraham Lincoln in the Senate. He's running for president as a Democrat. He opposes a federal slave code and territories, supports popular sovereignty, which is the idea that the states just decide for themselves, and he doesn't think the federal government should tell them one way or other. So Stephen Douglas is like a northern Democrat, which is kind of like a unicorn at the time. And then you got John Bell here. He's more Democrat. He's a constitutional union. He's like, hey, I ain't going to talk about the slavery. I ain't going to talk about it at all. I'm just trying to keep the country together. This is very much like Buchanan, who was the sitting president, who does not want to run again because it's awful. This is basically your option if you're just like, hey, let's just sit down and be quiet again. And like James Buchanan was our president and just didn't do anything. Let's just ignore it and hope it goes away. All right. So this is your candidate if you want to ignore it to go away. So here's what happens. This isn't real surprising if you know how the Electoral College works. There's only one person here who's anti-slavery, Abraham Lincoln. So all the free states all voted in 1860 for Abraham Lincoln. All right. So you see down here, John Bell, the guy who just wants to keep the country together, was really here what's called the Upper South. Stephen Douglas won like 2 states because you can't be halfway in on slavery. You're either all in on slavery or you're all out. John Breckinridge, which supports slavery and thinks there should be a federal law that requires that states have to have the choice of slavery, wins the South. So here's what ends up happening. All right. Abraham Lincoln wins the election because all the Republicans voted for Abraham Lincoln. The Democrats split their vote among these different states here. The South is going to lose their minds, and here's why. Not only do they already hate Abraham Lincoln, they hated Abraham Lincoln before the election, and this is pivotal. They say, our federal government no longer represents us because you elected Abraham Lincoln. Not a single Southerner voted for Abraham Lincoln. Not a single state voted for Abraham Lincoln. Not a single person in any of these states right here voted for Abraham Lincoln. Not a single person. So how can he represent the South if not a single person voted for him? Now you're telling me nobody is anti-slavery in the South? There's nobody that voted for Abraham Lincoln? They didn't, and here's why. There's a little extra part to that story. Abraham Lincoln was so hated by the people in charge in the South, his name was not allowed to be on the ballot. You literally did not have the option to vote for Abraham Lincoln in the South. They refused to put his name on the ballot. They hated him so much before the election even happened. So when Abraham Lincoln becomes the president of the entire United States without a single person in the South voting for him, this is pretty close to the final. It is the final straw, but there's one last ditch effort to keep the country together because they start talking about secession. Secession is the idea where you just leave and become your own country. Now, there's one last ditch effort here. All right, that's going to happen. It's called the Crittenden Compromise. So when Abraham Lincoln wins the election, all right, so he's going to win in November. So he doesn't actually take over until March. All right. So between November and March, there's a big flurry of activity happening in the country. The South presents the Crittenden Compromise map. All right. Here is what the Crittenden Compromise map says. You know, honestly, had the Crittenden Compromise come out 30 years before, it might have had a shot. But once you elect a Republican, a guy who clearly, and the Republican Party is against slavery, it is obviously the sea change against slavery is starting to take hold in the United States, clearly. All right. What the Crittenden Compromise attempts to do is the South says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go back to the 3630 line. All right, that's it. 3630 line. Everything below the 3630 line is a slave state, period. 100%. Anything above it, free state. They're even saying Virginia, Missouri, give up your slaves. We're just going to go with 3630 line, whatever. From now on, 3630 line across the center of the country. Below it is slave. Above it, no slave, period. From here on in. And you can never repeal it. You can never talk about it. It's just a thing that is. That is probably, while it probably wouldn't have been accepted anyway, to say you can never change this law, that's going to be a no-go. The reason the 3630 line was accepted under the Missouri Compromise is because the country ended right here. And the idea was all of this would be free states eventually, and that they would be able to outnumber the South. Now that you realize you have all this territory, if you just cut the country in half, slavery exists forever. And that's what the South says. It says, hey, if you want to stick together, if you want us to be a combined country, you're going to pass this right now. It's called the Crittenden Compromise. All right? That does not pass. The Crittenden Compromise killed in the Senate in January of 1861. So Lincoln has been elected, but he has not officially become the president yet. He won't actually be sworn in at this time until March. So the Crittenden Compromise is killed in the Senate. When the Crittenden Compromise is killed, the lower South secedes. They've been threatening this for a while. The fact they actually did it is huge. So here's a map. All right. This is the progress of secession. All these blue states say, we out. Sorry. It's gotten too much. The federal government doesn't have our back. We have this Abraham Lincoln guy. He's going to try to stop the expansion of slavery and whatever. You know what? We're done. We're done with you. And so the South secedes, which means they leave the United States. Now, obviously, they can't physically move their states, but all the blue states become their own country. They're just like, we're our own country now. See ya. You know, we had good times. You know, we'll remember fondly, you know, some things. But we're moving on from you. And so we're still going to trade with you. We're still going to, you know, sell you all our cotton. We're still going to do our own thing. But we're done. We're going to go do our stuff over here. Keep in mind that the South is not fighting a war. The South is not here like picking a fight. They're just saying, peace, we out. And they become their own country called the Confederate States of America. They're going to create a constitution very similar to the Articles of Confederation to give all the power to the states. Now, again, some of the arguments against, you know, oh, it can't be over slavery. It's about states' rights versus federal government. Did the South want the North to not get involved with the federal government? Sure, all right. But every single one of their constitutions, their state constitutions, allow for slavery. Specifically says slavery is here. And specifically say that is the reason that they left. Like, the South says it themselves. So I want to dispel, again, any argument that this was not over slavery. It 100%, it 100% was. All right. It's frustrating. It's like people who still want to say the earth is flat. It's not. It's like a verifiable fact. It's round. It's a verifiable fact that the Civil War is over slavery. So, anywho, so the South is going to secede and become its own country. Now, states like Virginia. Now, notice Virginia, is a little different shape than it is today. Because today, this gray area is Virginia and West Virginia. At the time, it's just Virginia because West Virginia doesn't exist. West Virginia will come out in the Civil War, and we'll talk about that next unit. North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, these are what's called the Upper South. With Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, Delaware. These are all slave states. The red states are free states. These are all slave states. And so Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas don't leave. They're like, what just happened? So North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, Virginia, they realize they have to make a decision. Whose side are they going to pick? Well, they're just going to sit here real quiet and see how this plays out. Because they're like, why are y'all being weird? Like, they're kind of, it's like the kid stuck between the two parents. Okay, I know, let's just see what happens here. Now, so this is a separate country, the Confederate States of America. You know what the name of this country is up here? The United States of America. So people refer to the United States as the Union during the Civil War because that's what America was usually referred to as, is the Union at the time. So it wasn't like this became a new country. This is still the United States of America. It is before, during, and after the Civil War. It's always the United States of America. The South is going to break off and become its own country. They're the only country that's going to change. They become the Confederate States of America, and they pick a president, a guy named Jefferson Davis. All right. Kind of odd that Jefferson Davis is the president, even though he did not actually run in the presidential election. So this is like a whole nother guy that they picked to be the president. Jefferson Davis is famous because he is the president of the Confederacy during the Civil War, though he doesn't really do a whole lot. And here's why. Because the government in the Confederate States of America, all right, in the Confederacy, is based very similar on the Articles of Confederation, all the power was given to the state governments. The president, Jefferson Davis, he is over the federal government. Well, there's really not a federal government. He's basically like a mascot and a cheerleader for all the states, trying to get them to work together. Because this war that's getting ready to start, he can't demand states do things. He can just ask them to work together. The reason Jefferson Davis is famous, even though he doesn't have very much power, is because Abraham Lincoln has complete and total power in the United States over the military and can demand people do stuff during the Civil War. All right. Since Abraham Lincoln is crazy famous in the North, in the United States of America, it makes sense that his counterpart, all right, which is Jefferson Davis in the Confederacy, they kind of like pit them together, but it's not really a fair comparison because Jefferson Davis doesn't have a fraction of the power in his country that Abraham Lincoln will have in the United States during the Civil War. But Jefferson Davis, dude with two last names, I guess. His first name's Jefferson. Well, I take that back. That's a pretty sweet first name. Jefferson. I'm not going to be critical. I think it's pretty cool first name. But Jefferson Davis is the president of the Confederacy during the Civil War, even though he doesn't nearly have the power that Abraham Lincoln does. All right. So let me show you a map here. All right. So the Upper South, like North Carolina here, Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, we're like, oh, what's going to happen? All right. So they're waiting to see how this plays out. All right. So Abraham Lincoln becomes the president. All right. And there is an issue real early on. So the issue is down here in South Carolina, there is a fort called Fort Sumpter. All right, so let's zoom in on here on Fort Sumpter. All right, so Fort Sumpter, this is a zoom in of it. This is in South Carolina. This is Charleston Harbor. This is Fort Sumpter. So Charleston is a deep water port for the South. It is absolutely pivotal, that Charleston, all right, which is really the Confederate States of America only deep water port. Especially at this point, Wilmington is still part of North Carolina, which is still part of the United States of America at this time, just being quiet, like, what's happening? You have to have this deep water port, which is fine because South Carolina seceded. But there's a fort that protects this port, all right? Who works in forts? Soldiers. All right, cool. Well, not so much cool when the Confederate States of America gets created, because the day before the Confederacy is created and South Carolina is part of the United States of America, guess who works in that fort? Soldiers for the United States of America. And then South Carolina secedes and they become their own country. Guess who works in the fort? Soldiers for the United States of America. The soldier like, wait, what? All of a sudden, the soldiers just wake up one day here at Fort Sumpter, and they're in occupied territory. They're surrounded by hostile forces. So the Confederacy, they basically roll up here on both sides. I mean, they surround Fort Sumpter. Fort Sumpter protects all of this area from the ocean, all right? They can't really protect themselves from the land because your own country doesn't attack you like when they built the fort. So all the soldiers are like, uh-oh, like this isn't good. So the Confederate soldiers show up and they're like, hey, we need that fort because we need it. So we need you guys just going back to America. You're good. All right. The soldiers respond by locking the doors. They're like, lock. And the Confederacy's like, why you gotta make this difficult? Now, the Confederacy does not want to go to war with the United States of America. The United States of America has the United States military. The Confederacy doesn't. They got militias getting set up. The North has a navy. The Confederacy does not. Like, the Confederacy just got created like a month ago. They're not ready to fight a war, all right? And they definitely don't want to fight against America. They just want to break up and walk away. All right. So they're like, how are we going to do this? They don't want to be aggressive with Fort Sumpter because it might start a war with the United States, and the South doesn't want that. The South doesn't want a war. They just want to be left alone, have their slaves, and just do their own thing. All right. So what the South decides to do is they're just going to wait them out. Eventually, they're going to run out of food and they have to leave. So that's what they do. They're going to sit down here and wait out Fort Sumpter. Now, let's go back to where Abraham Lincoln is now the president. This dude got elected president. And the moment Abraham Lincoln becomes president, half the country left because they hate you so much. Abraham Lincoln today, 16th president of the United States, considered probably him and George Washington, two best presidents we've ever had. All right. George Washington was loved while he was president. Abraham Lincoln is the most hated president we have ever had while he was president. I mean, literally, he got elected and half the country left. Right? Literally made their own country because they hated him. Abraham Lincoln was not loved while he was president, and was not loved by the North either. We'll talk about that in the Civil War. Incredibly hated president while he was there. Because doing the right thing, a lot of times it's really difficult. So Abraham Lincoln gets sworn in, half the country is left. Abraham Lincoln's like, I'm not going to let that happen. My job as the president is to do what's best for the country. Half the country can't leave. No, we're going to keep that country together. So he realizes that he wants to keep the country collectively together, united. Well, they've already left. So how are you going to get them back? Fight them. If you defeat them in war, you can bring them back in. So he knows this is probably what has to happen. However, the United States, the people in the North are like, good riddance. Bye to the South. They're like, good, glad they're gone. Abraham Lincoln's like, no. Like, Abraham Lincoln's like the only person, like, in the North at the time that, like, wants to keep America together. Like, no, we can't have that happen. No. So he needs to be at war with the South in order to force them to come back into the United States. So, he can't just go declare war on the South because the North won't want that. So how can you possibly go to war with somebody if they don't want to go to war with you? And you don't want to be the guys that start it, all right? So America only defends ourselves, all right, from hostile actions. South doesn't want to start a war, so how do we get the South to attack us? So they start it. Poke them with a stick. That's what we're going to do. We're going to poke them with a stick. So we're like, hey, South, does that bother you? 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 Does that? Until the South's like, stop it. We're like, oh, they attacked us. It's war. So the way we're going to poke them with a stick is at Fort Sumpter. So Abraham Lincoln knows that they're going to starve, that they're going to run out of food and they're going to have to leave. All right. So the South is just going to wait them out. So what Abraham Lincoln does, instead of going down and aggressively defending Fort Sumter and then being the guy that starts the war, he sneaks a ship in here, all right, called the Star of the West. It sneaks in here in the middle of the night and resupplies Fort Sumter with 3 months of food and sneaks out, and the South doesn't even know. The next morning, the South's like, bet you guys are getting hungry in there. And this guy like hops up over the fort. He's like, with the big turkey legs, like, no, we got some food in last night. We're good for like 3 months. And like hops back down. The South, realizing that the North has resupplied Fort Sumter, the South claims this is an act of aggression, right? By resupplying them and allowing them to stay. So the South responds in April of 1861 by opening fire on Fort Sumter. When the South opens fire on Fort Sumter, the battle doesn't last real long. Fort Sumter will surrender and the South will control Fort Sumter. But once the South opens fire on Fort Sumter, now you have the Confederate States of America have attacked a United States military installation. And when that happens, the United States of America will declare war on the Confederate States of America, and then in response, the Confederate States of America declare war on the United States of America. It's decision time. Once war starts, you got to pick a side. Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, that were the upper South, they choose to join the Confederate States of America. There are some, and so all the states that are in the Confederacy are slave states, all right? There are slave states, however, who never joined the Confederacy. Missouri, Kentucky. You can see how West Virginia is here. We're going to talk about that. That kind of happens throughout the window. West Virginia gets created. Maryland and Delaware, both slave states, and they are forced to stay. Maryland gets put under martial law because Washington, D.C. is on the border of Maryland and Virginia. If Maryland and Virginia both secede, the capital and where Abraham Lincoln is then an occupied territory. War is over. So Maryland may have seceded had they had the chance. One of the first things it does is Lincoln puts the military stationed all over Maryland and does not let them secede, puts them under martial law, which is just complete lockdown for the duration of the war, so that Maryland can't secede because Washington, D.C. is a city on the border of these two. And we're going to talk about that in great detail in the next unit. But so this is the Confederate States of America, and they're at war with the United States of America, and the Civil War has begun. It is really important here because I'm going to say it over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Yes, the Civil War started over slavery, but, and this is the new thing that I'm going to say over and over and over. Abraham Lincoln, when this war starts, he has one goal only. In Abraham Lincoln's mind, the idea of slavery, I ain't worried about slavery no more. Slavery's gone. Whatever. I don't care. I don't care what happens with slavery. My only goal, if Abraham Lincoln says, my only goal is to bring the Union back together. When I'm done here in office, it needs to be one country again. I don't care what happens. If I can win this war, and I can free every slave, great. And this is an actual quote from him. If I can win this war and free every slave, great. If I can win this war and free some slaves but not others, great. If I can win this war and not free a single slave, great. He's like, I'm done caring about slavery. We got to bring the country back together. Now, spoiler alert, end of the war, he does free all the slaves. All right, but that is a decision he actually made at the very end of the war based on those circumstances at the end of the war. At the start of the war, he's like, yeah, we're done worrying about slavery. We have a war to deal with, and our goal is to bring the South back in and make it one country again. I'm not going to be the guy who's on the clock when this thing falls apart. And we will talk about that quite a bit next unit. I want to show you a picture. And before I show you the picture, let me preface this. Abraham Lincoln became the president and the whole country left. Abraham Lincoln, spoiler alert again, is going to be assassinated 5 years later, all right, while still president, all right. He is going to be assassinated. Right before he got elected, he had a picture taken of him, an actual photograph. Right before he was assassinated, about a week before, he had another picture taken of him, all right. this man, the level of stress that takes place as the presidency, they show these pictures all the time. These two pictures of Abraham Lincoln I'm about to show you the level of stress that a man goes through when the entire country is murdering itself. This is 5 years apart. This is 1860. That is 1865. It's absolutely astounding, the amount that he appears to have aged based on the stress. Not only is there a war going on, he's got like his own people fighting against him. He's got his other stuff. One of his own children dies in the White House when this is taking place, of a sickness. A young child, elementary age child, dies of a sickness. His wife has a breakdown and has to be confined like a mental institution. All of this is taking place during the Civil War. And Abraham, I mean, the level of stress that can put on your body, and these pictures are great. And I told y'all yesterday I was going to tell you the story about his beard. So we're done for the day. You don't have to listen to the story, but let me tell you the story about the beard because you'll like it. So Abraham Lincoln didn't have a beard, all right? When he was running for president, all right, in 1860, he'd travel around the country and he would give speeches at different stops on these railroad tours. Well, he would get letters all the time, a lot of death threats. He literally had a file labeled death threats, but he would read every single letter that somebody sent him. This little girl sent him a letter one time. So for years, nobody really understood. He all of a sudden just grew a beard one day and wasn't a thing. But this little girl sent him a letter one time, and she said, she's like 10, and she's like, "Hey, Mr. Lincoln, heard your speech. I thought it was really good. You have a lot of good ideas. You're a great speaker, but you're really ugly. You're so ugly. It's really hard to look at your face when you talk, because you're so ugly. If you could grow a beard and hide your face, and hide your ugliness some, it would be easier to look at you." Abraham Lincoln grows a beard because of that. Now, here's what's crazy. He never told anybody that. It was after he was dead. They're going through his files, and they read this letter and saw it was dated right before he grew a beard. He literally grew this beard. So everybody thinks about the Abraham Lincoln beard. That's only something that he grew while he was president at the very end of his life, because he got a letter saying he was ugly. So I mentioned that. I was going to tell you all that yesterday, and I forgot to tell you all that yesterday, so I wanted to add it in there. So we're officially into the Civil War now. So this is the end of the unit. The next unit will be on the Civil War, and that's it for today on this part.